Turns out they owe me over $1 million. The morning those officers rolled up and told me I was trespassing on my own driveway, I knew Mallory Ridge was hiding something big. One lie led to another until I uncovered the truth. The HOA built their entire community on land my family still owns. Stick with me. This one turns fast, hits hard, and ends with justice they never saw coming. And hey, if you love stories where the underdog wins with nothing but grit and the law on his side, go on and subscribe. You'll fit right in here. The crunch of tires on gravel made me look up from tightening the hinge on my cattle gate. Sheriff Wade Collins's cruiser rolled to a stop in front of my ranch house. Uninvited, unexpected, and carrying a kind of tension that didn't belong on a quiet Montana morning. He stepped out slowly, one hand on his belt, eyes scanning the driveway as if expecting trouble. Behind him, like a shadow wearing perfume, stood Heather Mallory, president of the Mallory Ridge HOA and self-proclaimed queen of suburban order. She clutched a stack of papers to her chest, lips curved in a smirk that told me she'd been waiting for this moment. "Cole," Wade said, voice stiff, "we got a call. HOA filed a report saying you're trespassing on community property." It was such an absurd sentence that for a second, I just stared at him. "Trespassing?" I gestured at the dirt under my boots. "Wade, this is my driveway. My land, my house. I've lived here 21 years. Heather stepped forward without waiting to be invited. "Your structures violate multiple community standards, Cole. Your solar array is an eyesore, and that cattle gate doesn't meet our approved materials list. We warned you." I let out a slow, controlled breath. Nothing good ever came from matching a bully's volume. "Heather, for the last time, I'm not part of your HOA. This ranch predates Mallory Ridge by decades." Her jaw tightened. "Everyone who lives within the boundary of Mallory Ridge follows our rules. No exceptions." Wade shifted uncomfortably. He knew my father, knew the deed lines. But a report is a report, and procedure forces action. Still, his hand stayed far from his cuffs. "Cole, help me out," he said quietly. "If there's paperwork that says you're separate from the HOA, now's the time." "There is," I replied, "and if anyone bothered to walk into the county office instead of waving rule books around, we wouldn't be having this conversation." Heather's smirk sharpened. "We have maps, and according to our documentation, your driveway intersects community access lanes." My eyes narrowed. "Your documentation is wrong." Wade cleared his throat, glancing between the two of us. "Look, I'm not here to escalate anything, just here to verify the complaint." "That's the thing," I said. "The complaint is fake." Heather bristled. "Cole, this is exactly why you need oversight. You can't just build what you want, put up whatever you want, or drag down neighborhood values. We have standards." "Standards?" I stepped forward just enough for her to flinch. "Heather, your HOA was built on land carved out of my father's old pasture. Not 1 inch of this ranch belongs to you." A flicker, fear, crossed her expression, then hardened into something colder. "We'll see what the county says about that." Wade sighed. "Cole, I'm going to have to file that this was investigated. But if you have your deed handy, I'll bring it to the station later," I said. "Right now, I'd like both of you off my property." Heather didn't move. Instead, she lifted one of the papers for emphasis. "These violations stand until resolved. Expect fines." "Fines," I repeated, unable to hold back a dry laugh. "For land you don't own?" Her smile chilled. "We'll let the law decide." She turned and walked toward her SUV, heels clicking against my gravel like she owned every rock. Wade gave me a look that said he didn't like any of this, but he had to follow the report. He tipped his hat, then followed her down the drive. When the dust settled, I stood alone, hands tightening around the metal hinge. Something wasn't adding up. Heather wasn't just power-hungry. She was confident. Too confident. Confident enough to call the sheriff on a man standing in his own driveway. And confidence like that usually came from paperwork. Paperwork I'd never seen. But I would. One way or another, I was going to find out why the HOA believed they had control over land my family had owned since before Mallory Ridge even existed. And whatever they were hiding, I was about to dig it up. I didn't have to wait long for their next move. The following morning, a thick envelope sat skewed in my mailbox, the HOA's gold and navy seal stamped across the corner like a threat. Inside were 3 violation notices, each more ridiculous than the last. Unauthorized structure modification. Noise disturbance from machinery. Unregistered guests occupying driveway space. My solar panels. My tractor. My nephew's truck from last weekend. They had weaponized every normal part of my life. Another envelope arrived that afternoon. More violations. More manufactured charges. And then, because bullies never pace themselves, an email blast hit the entire subdivision claiming I was destabilizing community aesthetics and lowering property values with non-compliant rural structures. I hadn't changed a damn thing in 20 years. By sundown, neighbors I'd known half my life wouldn't even wave from their porches. I found Miguel Ortega leaning against his fence when I went out to check the cattle line. He watched me approach, then shook his head with a weary kind of sympathy. "She's coming after you hard," he said. "Same way she came for the Turners and the Bowdens. Those folks didn't fight back. That's why they're gone." Gone. As in sold their homes, packed their lives, and left because they couldn't stand the harassment anymore. "What's her angle?" I asked. Miguel's eyes tracked the ridge behind Mallory Ridge, where rooftops cut across the horizon like a row of teeth. "Power," he said, "and the board lets her get away with anything. She'll drown you in paperwork until you break or bend." I didn't bend easily. Heather hadn't figured that out yet. I walked back to the house and found another notice taped to my front door. Hand-delivered. It accused me of installing a non-permitted agricultural barrier. My cattle gate. The gate that had been there since before the subdivision was even planned. That was when anger gave way to something sharper. Strategy. I sat at my kitchen table, spread out every violation, and noticed something strange. Every claim referenced a boundary line that didn't match my deed. They weren't just harassing me. They were building a case based on a map I'd never seen. A map that implied my driveway, workshop, and pasture sat inside their jurisdiction. I grabbed my keys and left the paperwork scattered like confetti across the table. Before I could fire up the truck, another figure appeared in the driveway, Miguel again, jogging over with a folded paper in hand. "You should see this," he said. His voice carried the urgency of a man who'd seen this play out before. It was a community alert sent through the HOA app, something I wasn't even supposed to have access to. There it was, a message from Heather claiming I was refusing lawful compliance and posing risks to neighborhood cohesion. There was also a poll asking residents whether the HOA should seek county enforcement assistance to deal with me. I stared at the message, jaw tightening. "She's trying to isolate you," Miguel said. "Once the neighborhood turns on you, she'll try to force you onto their jurisdiction. It's how she cornered the Turners." My pulse thumped once, hard. "She can try," I muttered, "but she's going to regret it." Before Miguel walked away, he said something that stuck to my ribs like a warning. "Be careful, Cole. Heather doesn't come after people unless she thinks she already has something on them." That was the part I couldn't shake. Her confidence. Her certainty. The way she stood behind Wade this morning, like she owned not just the subdivision, but this ranch. It meant she believed she had documentation, something official, something she thought would shut me down. But nothing in my deed had changed. Nothing in county tax rolls had shifted. My father had been meticulous, obsessive, about boundaries. There was no way an HOA existed anywhere near our property lines, unless someone had rewritten them. I turned back into the house, sat down again, and forced myself to breathe. If Heather had a map, if she was pushing the sheriff, the board, and the subdivision, it meant she was working from paperwork that looked legitimate. Something filed quietly, without challenge. The stakes were suddenly far higher than a few harassment notices. If someone had altered survey lines, if someone had misfiled easements, if someone had illegally integrated old ranch land into the HOA, then I wasn't dealing with petty violations anymore. I was dealing with a paper war. And paper wars have consequences measured in land, money, and legal power. I gathered every notice, stuffed them into a binder, and laid my father's old deed on top. A question hammered into my skull. Why did the HOA believe they owned part of my ranch? The only place that answer existed was in county records, and I intended to dig it out. But as I loaded my binder into the truck, one last letter slid under the door. A final violation, time-stamped at 7:18 p.m. It read, "Final warning. Failure to comply will result in escalation to county authorities." Escalation. Heather wanted a war. She was about to get one. The next morning, I drove straight to the county administration building with the binder of violations stuffed under my arm and a knot tightening in my gut. If Heather was this confident enough to call the sheriff on a landowner standing on his own driveway, she had to be using something more substantial than HOA gossip. Paperwork doesn't lie. People do. Inside, the building buzzed with the usual shuffle of boots on tile, phones ringing, and clerks tapping keyboards. But I wasn't here for bureaucracy. I was here to find the root of whatever game the HOA was playing. Linda Barrett looked up as I stepped to the counter. Short gray hair, thick glasses, face like someone who'd seen every trick, scam, and petty land dispute in the last 30 years. She didn't waste words. Never had. "Morning, Cole. You don't usually show up unless someone's lit a fire under you." "They have," I said, placing the binder on the counter. "HOA's claiming my driveway is community property." She stared at me for half a second, then snorted. "Impossible. Your father would haunt this building before he let someone redraw your boundary line." "That's what I thought," I said. "But they filed something. Sheriff got called to my ranch yesterday." Her expression shifted. Not fear, but interest. "That's more dangerous." "Give me your parcel number," she said. I gave it. She typed. The screen flickered. Her brow creased. "Well," she murmured, "that's not right." My pulse ticked upward. "What?" "Your parcel shows 3 annotations added during the developer transition in 2001. Easement overlays, access notes, boundaries redrawn for subdivision planning." "That land wasn't included in the sale," I said quickly. "My father kept the whole eastern ridge." "He did," she said, clicking deeper. "But the developer filed adjustments for community access corridors. Looks like they widened internal HOA boundaries on their planning document." She paused, looked at me over her glasses. "But those adjustments don't reflect legally, not in the recorded deed. So the HOA is using a planning map, not the actual legal one." "Seems that way." She pulled up a scanned page. "And here's something else." She tapped the screen. My stomach dropped as I saw it. Multiple marked parcels, highlighted in digital yellow, scattered inside Mallory Ridge subdivision. "Why are those marked?" I asked. "Because," she said slowly, "they belong to you." "What?" "Your father retained them. Strategic ones, too. Trail entrance, drainage basin, common pavilion pad, even the mailbox cluster." I stood silent for a full breath as heat crawled up the back of my neck. Heather wasn't just reckless. She was blind. The entire HOA was built on the assumption that the developer bought everything, but they hadn't. Linda slid a printed map toward me. Cole, the HOA has been using your land for 22 years, for free, without a lease, and according to county record, without any permanent easement. I gripped the counter. Then what are they claiming? She pulled a dusty file from the back shelf, the kind no one touches unless something's gone very wrong. They're claiming this. It was the developer's planning map, unofficial, unsigned, never recorded, but circulated during the subdivision build. On it, my land parcels were colored like they were HOA common area. This map, she said, is worthless legally, but if the HOA's been using it as gospel, it explains their confidence. Suddenly, Heather's smugness made perfect sense. She truly believed she had jurisdiction over me, because the HOA had been operating off a fake foundation from day one. And if I challenge this, I asked quietly, what happens? Linda leaned in. If you challenge it, they'll be forced to defend 20 years of unauthorized land use, and that is a mess most HOAs can't afford. A surge of heat pulsed in my chest, anger and clarity mixing into something sharp. The stakes had just skyrocketed. I looked at the map again, then at the binder in my hands. Print everything, every parcel file, every easement, every reference to my land. She nodded, already pulling paper from the machine. Thought you'd say that. As I gathered the stack of documents, she paused one last time. Cole, if they've been operating facilities on your land without permission, you're holding the cards, all of them. I left the county building with a different kind of weight in my chest. Not fear, not frustration. Leverage. Real, undeniable leverage. And that leverage came with consequences Heather Mallory wasn't prepared to face. I sat in my truck, spread the papers out on the passenger seat, and traced the highlighted parcels with my finger. The playground. Mine. The pavilion. Mine. The drainage basin. Mine. The main mailbox cluster, used every day by over 100 residents. Mine. No wonder she was fighting so hard to dominate my ranch. Because if the truth came out, her entire empire would crack. But the most important question lingered like smoke. Why had no one noticed these parcels were still in my family's name? Either the HOA had never checked, or they checked and chose to ignore it. Neither option worked out well for them now. I gathered the papers, turned the ignition, and headed home with one thought pounding through my skull. Heather thought she owned me. She didn't realize I owned pieces of everything she controlled. And the moment I showed her that truth, the ground under Mallory Ridge was going to shift. Hard. I didn't waste time. The next morning, I called Tommy Reed, one of the most respected surveyors in the county. He'd worked with my father years back. He knew our land, knew our boundaries, and most importantly, knew how to make legal lines impossible to argue with. He showed up before noon in a dust-covered pickup, GPS gear stacked in the bed. Heard you stirred something up, he said. Linda called me last night. Told me you might need fresh boundary confirmation. Need more than confirmation, I told him. I need truth in fluorescent orange. He cracked a grin. Then let's give 'em a show. We walked Mallory Ridge like we were stringing tripwires. Every parcel Linda had highlighted, every strip of land the HOA thought they controlled, Tommy measured, marked, and logged with certified coordinates. He didn't question why. The paperwork told him everything. Then the flags went in. Bright, impossible to ignore orange stakes hammered into the earth like accusations. The trailhead? Flagged. The pavilion pad? Flagged. The retention basin? Flagged. The mailbox cluster? Flagged twice for emphasis. But the moment we reached the subdivision's main corridor, the temperature shifted. because Heather Mallory stepped out of her front door like she'd been alerted by radar. Clipboard pressed to her chest, nails clicking against plastic, eyes cold and sharp. "What do you think you're doing?" she demanded. Tommy didn't even bother to look up, surveying the legal boundaries of Maddox Ranch subdivisions. "There are no Maddox Ranch subdivisions," she snapped. "You're marking community property." "No, ma'am," Tommy replied calmly. "I'm marking parcels legally owned by Cole Maddox. County records confirm it." Her face tightened. "That can't be right." "It is," he said, moving to hammer the next stake. Heather stepped in front of him. "You can't mark community land with unauthorized materials. These flags violate HOA aesthetic regulations." Tommy lifted his head, finally giving her a look that said he'd dealt with customers like her, just never ones this wrong. "HOA regulations don't apply to land you don't own." I stepped beside him. "Back away, Heather. You're interfering with a legal survey." She glared at me as if she could burn a hole straight through my ribcage. "You think sticking plastic in the ground proves anything? We have our own maps." "Yeah," I said. "I saw them. They're fictional." Residents began spilling out of their homes. First a few, then a dozen. Confusion spread across the sidewalks as people followed the trail of orange flags. "What's going on?" someone asked. "Why is he marking the trail?" another whispered. "Isn't that HOA property? I thought the developer deeded all this." Heather turned to face them like a queen betrayed by her subjects. "Everyone go inside. This man is disrupting community order while under investigation for repeated violations." Tommy snorted under his breath. One resident, an older man I recognized from the pavilion committee, stepped closer and asked, "Heather, is this true? Does he own the trail?" She didn't answer. Instead, she pointed at me like she was condemning a criminal. "I am instructing you to cease this action immediately, or the board will escalate." "Already escalated," I said, handing her a printed copy of the parcel map Linda gave me. "Read it." She didn't. Her hand trembled as she shoved the paper back toward my chest. "You think you can intimidate me with outdated documents? The HOA has jurisdiction here, and I will not tolerate you undermining it." Tommy planted the next flag behind her. She spun around, startled. "This isn't intimidation," he said. "This is a legal survey that will hold up in any court in the state." Her jaw clenched, hard, and that was when I saw it. The flash of fear she tried to swallow. Fear that said she had known about the parcels, or suspected, or ignored the possibility for so long, she convinced herself the truth didn't exist. But truth doesn't disappear just because a clipboard says otherwise. Tommy finished the final boundary marking as the crowd grew. Parents from the playground, elderly couples from the walking path. Even Janice Fuller, one of Heather's own board members, stood on the sidewalk staring at the orange flags as if they were dynamite fuses. "Janice," Heather snapped, "tell them this is community land." Janice didn't answer. The silence cut deeper than any accusation. Heather's face went pale. "Don't just stand there. Say something." Janice swallowed. Then quietly, "We should probably verify this with the county." Heather wheeled on her. "Are you taking his side?" "No," Janice said carefully. "I'm taking the side that won't get us sued." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Heather felt the shift. She felt her grip loosening, her narrative unraveling, her power slipping inch by inch with every orange flag Tommy planted. I leaned slightly closer, voice low enough only she could hear. "This is just the start." Her eyes widened, not with anger this time, with realization. Because flags don't just mark land, they mark liability. And now the entire subdivision had seen them. As Tommy packed his equipment, Heather whispered, voice shaking, "You don't know what you're doing." "Sure I do," I said. "I'm taking back what's mine." She backed away without another word, almost stumbling, before retreating to her porch in silence. The HOA president, who once strutted through this neighborhood like she owned the place, suddenly had nothing to say. But I wasn't done. Not even close. These flags were just the opening act, and the next phase would hit harder. Much harder. After the flag incident rippled through the subdivision like a shockwave, I knew Heather wouldn't sit quietly and process her humiliation. Bullies don't go still. They get sneaky. And sneaky people always make mistakes when someone is watching. So I made sure someone was. That evening, I installed a full perimeter camera system across my ranch. Barn roof, workshop corner, driveway post, even a concealed unit in the old oak overlooking the subdivision fence. Not because I feared retaliation, because I expected it. And sure enough, 2 nights later, the footage proved me right. The first clip showed a figure in leggings and a windbreaker sneaking along the property line at 10:42 p.m. She carried a black trash bag and glanced over her shoulder like she was smuggling contraband. Then she dumped the entire bag, yard waste, clippings, and leaves, straight onto my land. Heather. Strike 1. Night 3? Her husband backed their landscaping trailer into my pasture to make a tight turn, leaving ruts deep enough to swallow a boot. He didn't even hesitate. Just used my land like an overflow driveway. Strike 2. But night 7 delivered the clip that changed everything. At 10:29 p.m., Heather appeared again. No bag this time. Instead, she held a can of green spray paint. She crouched next to one of Tommy's orange boundary flags and repainted it to match the grass. Then another. And another. She was literally trying to erase my property lines. Strike 3, and felony territory. I sat there watching the footage with my jaw tight enough to crack a molar. She'd gone from harassment to trespassing to tampering with legal survey markers, and the camera angle caught her face perfectly, every frame crisp enough to serve as courtroom evidence. Heather thought the HOA handbook was the law. Now she was on the wrong side of the real one. The next morning, I walked toward the mailbox at the exact time I knew she went out for her daily routine of grabbing HOA letters and cataloging the world's imperfections. She stiffened when she saw me, just for a fraction of a second. But that was all I needed. "Morning, Heather," I said casually. She didn't look up. "I don't have time today, Cole." "You should make time," I said, pulling my phone from my pocket. "I have something you'll want to see." Her eyes flicked toward the screen, just as I tapped the first video. Her face drained. There she was, in full color, repainting my survey markers like a teenager caught tagging a stop sign. Her lips parted. She stumbled back half a step. You can't record people like that," she stammered. "It's on my land," I replied. "You stepped onto it without permission, multiple times, including after dark." She swallowed hard, looking around to see who was watching. A couple of residents stood near the mailbox cluster, curiosity rising like heat off pavement. "Delete it," she whispered sharply. "Now." "No," I said, "but I will be making copies." She tried to recover her composure, but the cracks showed. "You're harassing residents," she hissed. "I'll file a restraining order if you keep approaching me." "I walked to get my mail," I said calmly. "You walked into my property at night with spray paint." "You can't prove that's me," she burst out. I played the section where she looked directly at the camera. Neighbors froze. Heather froze. The world held its breath. I ended the video and slipped the phone back into my pocket. "This stops now, Heather." She grabbed her mail with trembling hands and hurried off without another word. But her silence meant nothing. People like her never stop. They regroup. They plot. They escalate. So I escalated too. That afternoon, I printed every clip, timestamp, and location ID. I labeled a binder, "Unauthorized Activity, Evidence Log." Inside went photos of the survey stakes, screenshots of her trespassing, a full transcript of the video timestamps, notes from Tommy, verifying survey placement. Then I took it one step further. I called a lawyer. Grace Holloway answered on the second ring. Efficient, composed, a voice like someone who enjoyed the sound of justice tightening around someone's neck. I heard your name from the county clerk, she said, and heard you might be sitting on a situation involving unauthorized land use. You could say that. Bring everything you have, she said. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. I dropped the binder onto my table with a heavy thud, the sound of a turning point. But the day wasn't finished. Just before sunset, another HOA notice appeared on my door. This one accusing me of filming neighbors without consent and creating a hostile environment. The paper trembled in the wind like it already knew it wouldn't hold up in court. They were doubling down. Fine. So was I. As I closed the door for the night, I paused at the window. Out past the subdivision, an orange flag flickered under the porch light like a warning beacon. Phase 2 was complete. Phase 3, the legal strike, was coming next. And when it hit, Mallory Ridge wouldn't know what hit them. Grace Holloway's office was tucked into a renovated feed store on Main Street, small, quiet, and dangerously efficient. I walked in at 8:58 a.m. with the evidence binder under my arm. She was already waiting, sleeves rolled up, coffee untouched, eyes sharp with focus. "Let's see what you've got," she said. I slid the binder across the desk. She opened it like she was cracking the spine of a case she already planned to win. She didn't skim. She consumed. Every timestamp, every frame, every map, every flagged parcel. By the time she closed the binder, her expression had shifted from curiosity to something much colder, something that made the hairs on my arms rise. "Cole," she said, "what the HOA has been doing to you is not only harassment, it's legally reckless." That's what I figured. "Oh, it's worse." She pulled my father's old deed from the file and placed it beside the county parcel reports Linda printed. "These documents show your land never transferred, not even provisionally. That means every structure they've built, every trail they've promoted, every mailbox they've installed on your parcels." "Unauthorized," I said. "Unauthorized," she echoed. "And vulnerable to restitution claims." She opened another page. "But here's the part that concerns me most. The developer created a temporary easement for construction staging back in 2001. It expired in 2017. She tapped the date with her pen. Expired. Never renewed. Never extended. Never replaced. I leaned forward. Let me get this straight. The HOA has been treating my land like community space for 22 years, and the only easement they ever had ended 6 years ago? Correct. She clicked her pen. Meaning every year since 2017 they've been in violation of county code. And every day they've operated those spaces without permission? Liability. How much liability? She flipped the page toward me. Potentially hundreds of thousands, she said. Back rent, damages, restoration costs, legal penalties. More if we can prove the board had knowledge of the missing easement. I let that sink in. Not slowly, but like a hammer hitting steel. Heather wasn't just wrong. She wasn't just arrogant. She was running an HOA built on borrowed soil, and the lender had finally shown up. Grace continued, voice cool and steady. But the real leverage is here. She pulled up an annotated HOA bylaw page. Their entire enforcement authority depends on jurisdiction boundaries. If their boundaries don't include your parcels, and they don't, then every violation they sent you is invalid. All of them, I repeated. Every last one. She closed the binder. You are not under their authority, and based on these documents, they're under yours. I exhaled slowly. The shift in power wasn't just emerging, it was tilting the ground. Grace leaned back. Now we need to move strategically. First, we prepare a cease and desist letter demanding all further HOA actions against you stop immediately. Second, we notify the county of the expired easement. Third, we document the survey tampering. And the videos? I asked. She smiled, not warmly, but with the satisfaction of someone sharpening a blade. Trespassing and tampering with legal markers? Those go directly to the sheriff. A knock interrupted us. Her paralegal stepped in. Ms. Holloway, HOA President Mallory is calling again. Third time this morning. Grace raised an eyebrow at me. Interesting. Let it go to voicemail, she said. Document the call times. The paralegal nodded and left. I stared at Grace. She knows something's coming. She senses pressure, Grace corrected. She doesn't know the size of the avalanche yet. Then Grace did something unexpected. She reached for another document, one I hadn't seen. This is the planning map the HOA uses, she said. Linda sent it over. The same map Heather had waved around like gospel. The same map the HOA used to justify fines, boundaries, violations, everything. Grace placed my father's deed beside it. Side by side, they told two different stories. Mine was legally binding. Theirs was legally meaningless. Cole, Grace said quietly, this HOA has built an entire identity on a document that was never recorded. They've been operating illegally for 2 decades, and they've been using that map to punish you, intimidate neighbors, and rewrite reality. I stared at the 2 pages, my deed, solid and indisputable, their map, flimsy and fraudulent. Then it's time to give them a new reality, I said. Grace nodded. I'll draft the cease and desist today, but before we fire, I want you to do something. What's that? Go home. Install a few more cameras if you have to. Document everything. When people like Heather feel their power slipping, they make mistakes. She's already making them. Good, Grace said. It'll make our case airtight. Right then, my phone buzzed. A new HOA notice. I opened it. Violation. Obstruction of community access lane fine. $250 per day until removed. The obstruction was my cattle gate. Grace looked over my shoulder. Send that to me. I forwarded it. She scanned it once, set it on top of the binder, and said, This was their last mistake, Cole. What do you mean? She met my eyes. Because now they've crossed into fraud. My pulse tightened. Fraud? Yes, they knowingly enforced rules over land they do not own, using jurisdiction they do not have, and demanding payment they are not entitled to. That is fraud. I let out a slow, hardened breath. So what happens next? Grace closed the binder with a decisive thud. Next, we pull the pin on this thing. Phase 3 wasn't coming anymore. It had officially begun. Grace's cease and desist letter went out that afternoon. Certified mail, email, and a direct copy to the county attorney. It stated, in the cleanest legal language possible, that the HOA was to halt all enforcement actions against me immediately. Any further interference would be considered willful harassment, fraud, and illegal encroachment on private property. Most people would back off at that point. Heather Mallory wasn't most people. By the next morning, 3 more violation notices were taped to my gate. Same smug formatting, same fake authority, same escalating threats. She wasn't slowing down. She was panicking, and panic always leaves a trail. Miguel Ortega showed up just after sunrise, hands in his jacket pockets, expression tight. He'd lived in Mallory Ridge longer than anyone except the original developer. Cole, he said, you should see this. He handed me a folder. Worn edges, wrinkled corners, years of being shoved in drawers by a man who never expected it to matter again. Inside were HOA letters, dozens of them. Every single one signed by Heather. Every single one baseless or retaliatory. You kept all this? I asked. Miguel nodded. She fined me because my shed wasn't architecturally harmonious. Told me my wife's rosebush was a hazard. Said my blue front door was lowering home values. I nearly lost my mind. Why didn't anyone fight back? His answer was quiet but heavy. Because we didn't think we could. He paused, then added, but now we do. Before I could respond, Janice Fuller, a retired teacher known for never backing down from anyone, walked up my driveway carrying a binder thicker than mine. Heather bullied my daughter the first month we moved in, Janice said. Told her sidewalk chalk wasn't allowed because it made the neighborhood look impoverished. I recorded every meeting after that. She tapped the binder. Everything she's ever said on record is in here. Janice, this is gold. No, she corrected. This is the rope she hung herself with. We spread everything across my dining table. Maps, letters, timestamps, HOA meeting minutes, Grace's notes. It was like watching a crime scene assemble itself, piece by piece. Then Grace arrived. She dropped her own binder, half the size, 10 times more dangerous, onto the table. I've analyzed the numbers. See, she said. You all need to hear this. We gathered around. She flipped the binder open. Charts, county code references, cost breakdowns, penalty calculations. This, she said, pointing to the top line, is what the HOA owes in maintenance penalties alone for violating the expired easement. The number was brutal and big. $708,000, she read aloud. Minimum. Miguel exhaled. Holy hell. And that doesn't include back rent, Grace added. 15 years of occupying land they do not own, using it for community amenities. Fair market value. Rough estimate. Another $200,000. Janice put a hand to her mouth. They'll go bankrupt. Grace shook her head. Not yet. That's only if Cole chooses to enforce everything. She turned to me. And you could. You legally could. I didn't answer yet. Because this wasn't about revenge. It was about truth. What else is on the table? I asked. Grace flipped another page. More numbers. More weight. If you deny renewal of the easement, she said, the HOA must remove every structure built on your land. Pavilion, playground, mailbox cluster, drainage infrastructure. That removal would cost, she pointed to the total. Everyone froze. Damn, Miguel whispered. 1,200,000, Janice said softly. That's the low estimate, Grace replied. And if they fail to remove it within the legally required time frame, additional penalties. Silence fell across the table. Not fear, clarity. Heather had picked a fight with a man who owned the ground under her feet, and now the math was screaming what she hadn't wanted to believe. She had never held any power at all. I broke the silence. What happens when we go public? Grace folded her hands. Then everything collapses. Her authority, her board, her narrative. The neighbors who feared her will turn on her overnight. And the HOA will have no choice but to face the truth. And Heather? I asked. She'll try to deflect. She'll accuse you of harassment. She'll play the victim. But once we present the documents, she tapped the binder. Her house of cards falls. A knock came at the door. We all stiffened. I opened it to find Sheriff Wade Collins standing there, hat under his arm, expression serious but not hostile. Cole, he said, got a minute? I stepped outside with him. He kept his voice low. Heather called the station 4 times today, he said. Said you're threatening her. Said you're planning to sue the entire community? And you believe her? I asked. He shook his head. No. That woman's been wound tight since the day she moved in. But the calls are becoming official complaints. And that puts me in a position. What position? The position where I need to warn you, she's about to escalate. I took that in. Not fear, confirmation. Sheriff Collins continued, whatever you're preparing, make sure you do it clean. Legal, documented. Once this gets public, it's going to get loud. It already is, I said. He nodded once. Then hang on. Because she's not going down quiet. He climbed back into his cruiser and drove off. I returned inside. The room was silent, waiting. I looked at them, Grace, Miguel, Janice, and made the decision that shifted the entire war. We're not hiding this, I said. We're not playing defense anymore. Grace nodded slowly. Then how do you want to proceed? I closed the binder and stood. We go public. Miguel grinned. A meeting? Bigger, I said. Janice crossed her arms. A neighborhood announcement? Bigger. Grace raised an eyebrow. Cole, what are you planning? I let the answer land. A community barbecue. On my land. The energy in the room snapped into focus. Miguel laughed. Oh, she's gonna hate that. Oh yeah, Janice said. She'll absolutely lose it. Grace's smile sharpened. Then it settled. Because this fight wasn't ending in court. This fight was ending in broad daylight. On land Heather never owned, never controlled, and never understood. And when the neighbors arrived, when officials showed up, when Heather stormed in furious and unprepared, that was when we would reveal everything. Her fraud, her lies, her misuse of authority, her illegal occupation of my land. The war wasn't just turning, it was tipping. And Heather Mallory was standing right under the avalanche. Word travels fast in small communities, faster still when fear starts to crack. By Friday afternoon, nearly every household in Mallory Ridge had heard the same phrase whispered through backyards, text threads, and front porch conversations. Cole's holding a barbecue on Saturday, and he's showing something. I didn't need gossip to do my work. I needed witnesses. And Grace made sure the invitations carried weight. Community barbecue, open to all residents, local officials, and county personnel. Topic: land use, property rights, and community transparency. The phrase transparency alone sent a tremor through the HOA board. Saturday came. People showed up early. Miguel manned the grill, flipping burgers like he'd waited years for the right moment to feed a crowd for the sake of justice. Janice set up tables with water bottles and paper plates. Kids ran around freely, some of them for the first time without glancing over their shoulders for HOA lurking. By noon, 50 people filled my pasture. Even Sheriff Wade Collins arrived, hat off, relaxed, but alert. Just observing, he said with a half smile, and making sure nobody tries anything stupid. I knew exactly who he meant. At 12:14 p.m., a white SUV rounded the curve, slow, deliberate, like a parade float carrying pure indignation. Heather stepped out wearing her power outfit, sharp blazer, clipboard in hand, lips thin as fishing wire pulled tight. Behind her, 2 HOA board members followed, looking much less confident than usual. And trailing them, a Knox County deputy. Apparently, she'd requested a civil standby. Perfect. Every seat, every person, every official was right where I needed them. Heather marched straight toward me, voice already raised to carry over the crowd. This gathering is not authorized, she announced. This land, this entire area, is under HOA jurisdiction. You are knowingly violating community regulations by— Stop! Sheriff Collins said sharply. Heather turned, offended. Sheriff, this is an HOA matter. We are enforcing subdivision. No, he cut in. You're here because you requested a standby, which means your job is to observe and remain peaceful, same as mine. Her mouth snapped shut, but her eyes burned. She wasn't here for peace. She was here to stop whatever she believed I was about to reveal, which is exactly why I waited until everyone quieted before stepping onto a small platform made from 2 hay bales and a sheet of plywood. "Thank you all for coming," I began. "Today isn't about conflict. It's about truth, about who owns what, and who has the right to enforce anything on this land." Whispers swelled. People leaned closer. I held up the yellowed development maps Linda Barrett had printed. Then the original easement documents Grace had unearthed. Then the survey results. "This," I said, "is the history your HOA never showed you. The land under the playground, the pavilion, the trailhead, the mailbox cluster. None of it belongs to Mallory Ridge." I paused, letting the shock ripple outward like a dropped stone in water. "It belongs," I continued, "to me. It has for decades." A stir ran through the crowd. Someone muttered, "Wait, seriously?" Another resident whispered, "She said it was community land." Heather's voice sliced across the air. "That is a lie!" I lifted the binder of supporting evidence. "Every map, every deed, every county file says otherwise." I set the binder down and nodded to Grace. Grace stepped forward, posture calm but commanding, and addressed the crowd. "The HOA's authority derives from the land it has easements or ownership over. But these easements expired 6 years ago. The HOA has been operating community facilities illegally, spending resident money on property that was never theirs." Gasps. A few curses. A man in the second row shook his head slowly. "But that's not all," Grace continued. "By failing to maintain these facilities according to the original agreement, the HOA owes over $700,000 in penalties. And if Cole chooses not to renew the easement, the HOA will be legally required to remove every structure within 60 days. A stunned silence fell. Even the children stopped moving. Heather finally snapped. "This is harassment!" she shrieked. "He's making false claims, fabricated documents. He's threatening this community." I reached into my pocket. "Then let's talk about threats." I tapped my phone screen. A small portable speaker projected the video onto a nearby TV monitor. Footage appeared. Heather dumping yard waste. Heather trespassing with a flashlight. Heather repainting survey flags. Her face illuminated, unmistakable. Gasps turned into outrage. Someone whispered, "She did that?" Another resident said, "All this time she blamed others." The HOA deputy looked at Heather in disbelief. Sheriff Collins folded his arms. Heather's face went white. "This is taken out of context," she insisted, but her voice cracked. This is manipulated. This is illegal surveillance." "It was filmed on my land," I said quietly. "You walked onto it. You tampered with legal markers. You trespassed." "We need to investigate this further," Sheriff Collins said calmly. "But the footage looks authentic." Heather spun toward the crowd, desperation crawling up her neck. "He's lying. He's trying to tear apart everything we built here." "No," Janice Fuller said, stepping forward. "You did that. One rule at a time, one family at a time, one abuse of power at a time." Miguel joined her. "We all stayed quiet because we thought you had authority. Turns out you didn't." Residents murmured, some nodding, some angry, some shaken. I took a step back, letting the truth sink in. Because this moment, the exposure, the clarity, the collective awakening, was the avalanche I'd been building toward. Heather tried one last time to assert control. "I demand," she said, shaking, "that this gathering disband immediately. The HOA has the right to—" "No," Commissioner Webb said firmly from the crowd, his presence silent until now. "You don't have that right. Not here, not today, and according to these documents, not ever on this land." Heather's jaw dropped. "That's correct," he added, "and there will be an official county review of the HOA's operations." The deputy stepped beside her. "Ma'am, I think we're done here." Residents slowly turned their backs on her. Not yelling, not gloating, just done. And for someone like Heather Mallory, that quiet rejection was harsher than any courtroom verdict. The HOA president who once ruled the subdivision with fear now stood alone in a sea of people who finally saw the truth. She backed away, shaky, humiliated, her voice barely a whisper. "This isn't over." But everyone knew it was. The barbecue had cracked Heather's authority. What happened the next morning shattered it. At 8:17 a.m., my phone vibrated with 3 messages from neighbors. "Emergency HOA meeting. Heather's losing it. She's trying to spin everything you showed yesterday. You should hear what she's saying." I didn't need to attend. Witnesses were already inside. But Grace insisted. "Go. Stand in the back. Say nothing. Let the truth collapse on her." So I did. The HOA community room, built illegally on my land, was packed wall to wall. Residents who used to whisper now spoke openly. People who once feared Heather now glared, murmured, folded their arms. Heather walked in late, a stack of papers clutched like a lifeline. Her posture was tight, her jaw locked, her eyes red-rimmed from a night of frantic damage control. She slammed the papers on the table. "Everything you saw yesterday was doctored," she announced. "The deeds, the footage, the survey, it's all falsified to attack me and destabilize our community." The room buzzed, not with agreement, but disbelief. Janice Fuller stood up immediately. "Are you calling the county clerk a liar? Or the surveyor? Or the attorney who presented everything in front of elected officials?" "That attorney is in on it," Heather snapped. Gasps. Eyes widened. Someone whispered, "She's finally cracked." Miguel stood next, calm but firm. "You harassed families for years. You fined people for having flowers. You lied to us about land ownership. Now you're trying to paint yourself as a victim?" Heather's voice wavered. "I acted within my authority as president of this HOA." A voice boomed from the side of the room. "You never had that authority." Commissioner Webb stepped inside with Supervisor Martinez at his side. Conversations died instantly. Heather's face drained. Webb continued. "We reviewed the documents presented yesterday. Every one of them checks out. The HOA has been operating facilities on private land without permission, violating multiple county regulations." Her board members shifted in their seats, looking like children waiting for detention slips. "And," Martinez added, "the county is opening a formal investigation into financial misuse, unauthorized improvements, and fraudulent representation of land rights." Heather's breath hitched. You can't do that." "We already have," Webb said, "and since you filed multiple false complaints with law enforcement, those cases are under review as well." Heather wilted into her seat. Her board members inched away from her. Then the final blow landed. Sheriff Wade Collins entered through the back. He looked around, nodding politely. "Morning, folks. Here on official business." Heather visibly brightened, until Collins walked right past her and approached me instead. "Mr. Maddox," he said loudly enough for the entire room, "I'd like to formally state that your evidence has been submitted to the county attorney, and your claims are valid." A wave of murmurs rolled across the room. Heather shot to her feet. "What about my restraining order against him?" Collins shot her a look that could freeze fire. "The judge reviewed your petition," he said. "It was denied, and upon further examination, your statements raise concerns about malicious intent." Heather swayed like the floor had shifted. Martinez stepped forward with the dry tone of someone delivering administrative death sentences. "Effective immediately, the county recognizes that Mallory Ridge HOA is in breach of multiple contractual obligations and may no longer enforce rules pertaining to land not under its legal control." Heather whispered, No, that's not," the developer said, but nobody listened. Her reign wasn't slipping. It was over. And then the collapse hit its breaking point. Janice pulled a folder from her bag. "I have something else." She handed it to Supervisor Martinez. Inside, screenshots of emails, messages, meeting recordings, and the private Facebook posts Heather wrote smearing neighbors, including several racist, classist, and disparaging remarks about residents' families. The room erupted. Heather tried to speak, but the outrage drowned her out. "You targeted us. You lied to us. You threatened our kids. You stole our dues. You abused your position." Collins finally raised a hand. "Enough." Silence. He turned to Heather. "Ma'am, you need to step outside with me." "What? Am I under arrest?" she panicked. "For the moment, no," he said calmly. "But we need to document statements and confiscate HOA records pending investigation." Her mouth fell open. Her legs buckled. 2 board members immediately placed a letter on the table. Their resignation letters. Then 3 more. Then 4. Heather stood alone, trembling, surrounded by people who once feared her but now saw her exactly as she was. Small, desperate, and completely powerless. She whispered, barely audible, "You'll all regret this." Supervisor Martinez spoke firmly. "No, Ms. Mallory. We regret letting you go unchecked for this long." The meeting adjourned in chaos, tears, and relief. But one sound lingered with perfect clarity. Heather leaving the building, escorted by Collins, her clipboard hanging useless at her side like a badge she no longer had the right to carry. Mallory Ridge HOA hadn't just cracked. It had imploded. And now, finally, the pieces could be rebuilt. Without her. The days following the HOA collapse moved fast. Faster than I expected. Faster than anyone in Mallory Ridge could keep up with. But for the first time since this whole war started, the momentum wasn't working against me. It was clearing a path. By Monday morning, Heather's resignation hit every inbox in the subdivision. It wasn't emotional. It wasn't apologetic. It was 2 lines. "Effective immediately, I resign as president of Mallory Ridge HOA. Further communication will be handled by the remaining board." No signature flourish. No attempt at control. Just an exit. And a quiet acknowledgement that the power she clung to had evaporated. The remaining board, what was left after the mass resignations, scheduled an open meeting at the community center. For the first time ever, they invited me, not to accuse me, not to interrogate me, but to negotiate. A strange feeling, walking into a building constructed illegally on my own land, this time welcomed rather than threatened. Grace walked beside me. Sheriff Collins attended as a neutral observer. Miguel and Janice followed, representing the community's voice. The board members looked drained, exhausted, humbled. Gone was the arrogance. Gone was the fear-driven authority they used to hide behind. They looked like people who had just realized how much damage one leader had caused under the guise of rules. Janet Morrison, the retired teacher with the backbone of steel, opened the meeting. "Mr. Maddox," she began, "the community owes you an apology. A sincere one. What happened under Heather's leadership should never have been allowed, and we'd like to make things right." I nodded, not letting the moment drag. "I'm open to a fair agreement." Grace placed a folder on the table. "Here are the proposed terms. A 10-year renewable lease, $2,000 a month, HOA responsible for all maintenance, safety compliance, and structural upkeep. A new oversight clause preventing any enforcement beyond their legal boundaries. No more abuse. No more invented rules. No more unchecked authority." Janet read every line carefully, then looked up. "This is fair," she said. "More than fair." Another board member added, "It protects everyone, including us." They signed. I signed. And the moment the ink dried, Mallory Ridge officially acknowledged something they had fought tooth and nail to deny. They lived on land built on agreements they never owned. And now, those agreements were finally honest. But the victory didn't feel like fireworks or fist-pumping. It felt like silence. The good kind. The kind a man earns. Over the next few weeks, the transformation spread like sunlight through a cracked barn door. Miguel replanted his garden the way he wanted. Bold, messy, alive. Janice brought her grandkids to the playground without flinching at the thought of a citation. The Johnson kids rolled out their basketball hoop again, bouncing the ball freely instead of in secret. The fear that once hung over the subdivision evaporated. People waved again, talked again, smiled again. Even Sheriff Collins stopped by one afternoon just to say, "Looks like you did them a favor, Cole." "Didn't plan on it," I said. "Doesn't matter. They needed someone to stand up." Maybe so, but I didn't do it for applause. I did it because a man's land is more than dirt and fences. It's history. It's dignity. It's the one thing no one gets to claim except him. And the lease payments? I didn't pocket them. Instead, I founded the Maddox Trades Scholarship, $5,000 a year for a local kid going into electrical, plumbing, carpentry, or agriculture programs. Exactly the kind of practical backbone rural Montana needs. When I announced it publicly, people clapped. But one face stood out, Miguel's nephew, eyes wide, hopeful, shocked. "You're helping people," Miguel said quietly afterward. "Nah," I replied. "Just repurposing HOA money for something that actually matters." And then came the final moment that sealed everything in place. A month later, I stood at my fence line, watching the sunset, lean across the land my father and grandfather once walked. The cattle gate Heather tried to regulate creaked softly in the wind. The solar panels she wanted removed gleamed with quiet defiance. Everything was intact. Everything was mine. Justice hadn't come with shouting. It came with proof, with patience, with the law. And sometimes the strongest victories aren't loud. They're the ones that leave a community better than it was before. As the last light faded behind the ridge, I tipped my hat and whispered to myself, "It's settled. Finally settled." And this time there was no one left to argue. If you've ever stood your ground against unfairness, drop a simple yes in the comments so folks know they're not alone out here. Justice only works when ordinary people refuse to be pushed off their own dirt. And if you want to ride along for more real Western stand-your-ground stories, go on and subscribe. I'd be glad to have you back.